Hey, Power People. Welcome to Renewable Rides, powered by VECKTA. I'm Gareth Evans, the CEO and founder.
And I'm Dan Roberts, head of sales. In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, learnings, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition, on-site energy, and sustainability through the experiences of our inspiring guests and team here at VECKTA.
So get ready for an exhilarating adventure into the fast-paced world of challenging limits, adapting purposefully, and empowering co-creation to accelerate the energy transition with those that are on a mission to create a more resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future. So let's go.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. This is Dan Roberts, and I'm actually joined with one of my colleagues here from the VECKTA team for his co-hosting debut, Patrick Baker. Thanks for joining us, Patrick. So,
thanks for having me.
Really pleased with the guest that we have today, Nick Firestone, Chief Operating Officer of Firestone Walker Brewing. Really a leader among craft brewers, or I don't know if you even qualify yourself as a craft brewer these days with how much growth you've had, but they've really been one of the brewers that has really taken the energy transition and adopted it and really brought it into the internal culture of the business. So I'm super excited to have Nick here. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Well, thanks for having me. And I would say we definitely do like to think of ourselves as still a craft brewer, no matter how big we get. So
good.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Good. Well, Nick, I think it'd be helpful to just open up with a little bit about your background. What are you passionate about personally, professionally?
Sure.
What really makes you tick?
Sure. Yep. You already introduced me, so I don't need to do that. I've been my first job at the brewery here. I washed dishes and picked up nails on the construction site when we first moved in to the building. So that was almost 30 years ago is when we got our start. 1996. We were in the wine business before. We were talking about that earlier. Wine is a very difficult industry to be in general because you're farming and dealing with marketing a product. We started making beer, putting beer into wine barrels and a custom crush pad on the back piece of the property. And that was how the brewing company started. It was right along the sort of advent of craft beer in general. So it's I'm a third generation beverage alcohol representative here. In my journey, I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, got out of the Marine Corps, went to UC Berkeley. After that, I spent some time working for a consulting firm. And there's sort of a family tradition that if you're going to join the company, you got to actually have some qualifications and skill set to bring to the table. So I did that and rejoined a few years ago. My uncle is the CEO. My father, Adam, is still involved sort of on a board level. But yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Nice. Well, maybe you can give a little backstory on the brewery itself. It's a family business. Yep. How did it all start?
Yeah, as I mentioned, about 30 years ago, my dad was running the family winery in San Ynez Valley, California, and he had a crazy brother-in-law who was working in the computer business, and they were sort of dreaming up these ideas about starting different companies, and they aligned on beer as sort of the what would be a potential opportunity for them. And my uncle David, who was in the he's in the computer business, but he's from England, had a real passion for sort of British pale ales, the brewing culture, the pub culture of London and sort of Southern England that he grew up in. And, my dad coming out of wine sort of always appreciated beer. Wine at the time, I think, there was sort of the reputation of the pinkies out, and it was very fancy sommeliers and that sort of stuff. And it's become a lot more approachable. And I think he saw beer as sort of an opportunity to have a working man, everyday kind of product. And so, yeah, they started it together. Where we are today is in Paso Robles, California. So it was the site of our first real production brewery. It was the Slow Brewing Company. It had foreclosed. We ended up buying it from the bank back in right around 2000. And luckily for them, and for our family, was a brewmaster who was the original brewmaster for the Slow Brewing Company, had been basically the whole building was shut down. He had been sneaking in kind of underneath the gate and keeping the beer alive, moving beer out of tanks and stuff. And we found this guy kind of moving barrels around and interviewed him, and he obviously got the job. And that's Matt Brindleton, who's our longtime brewmaster and close friend. And he's the real sort of brains behind the operation and why our beers taste the way that they do. So yeah, that's the basic story.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Love the brother-in-law connection. Maybe you can share. The logo has some meaning in the family.
Yeah, I would say somebody was asking me once, like, we were talking about business tips and starting a business. And I said, basically, the one thing I wouldn't do and is not advisable is starting a business with your brother-in-law. That's number one rule. So those two guys decided to do that. Our logo is the lion and bear. My dad is Adam. He's represented by the bear. He's from California. He was a Marine. He's very grumpy. He was sort of responsible for all the production, logistics, supply chain, sort of the back end. And then my uncle David, who's British, he has long hair. He's sort of very proper, and he's the lion. And they're obviously fighting because it's very natural. Sometimes you create a logo and it doesn't actually fit the personalities, and this one fits perfectly. So, yeah.
Love that.
Start a business with brother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly worked out.
We're still, a lot is argued over, a lot of opinions. It's a big family, but for the most part, it works. Somehow it works.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing you guys adopt something that we do, which is be hard on the problem, not the person.
Yeah. Well, there's some hard on the person. Maybe a bit of both. They like to say about each other is that, or my uncle likes to say, my sister picked my partner, and my dad says my sister married my partner. So it's like, it wasn't really up to them.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. That's funny. Well, so you guys are here in the heart of the Central Coast. And as we were talking before, brewing is very much in touch with the land. It's driven by all the products and the ingredients, or the four major ingredients are coming from farm. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your connection to the land, connection to the community, and some of the ethos behind that.
Yeah, coming from wine, we obviously had, and part of what we talked about when we first started, you'll notice, as opposed to other breweries, we actually put our name on the company, and that was an intentional choice. It was like, we want to have something with our name on it so that we stand behind the quality, like we're putting our reputations on the line. And coming from wine, we sort of understood the idea of terroir. We understood the idea of farming and being close with your community, being embroiled in your community and being a part of it. And brewing is no different. I mean, breweries, since their advent, existed. Basically, you had a town or a city, and there was a brewery in the middle of it. You go back to any part of Europe, and that exists.
Mm-hmm.
So that relationship with your community, relationship with the land, is sort of natural. The piece that isn't is, you're buying your inputs versus wine, where you're growing your inputs. And for brewers, I think there is that step, but it's, to make a quality beer, you have to have quality ingredients. We visit our hop farmers, we visit, our malt houses, we visit farmers, fields and things like that, to have a real intimate understanding of what we're actually putting into the, into the product. So, I think that's a piece of it. And then the other piece of it that is very natural is just being on the Central Coast of California. A lot of our inputs don't come easily. Hops are made far north of us. Our grain comes from Canada and, other parts of the world. Water is a very difficult resource to come by in California. Although the last year has been very favorable for us. So I think there's a lot of kind of uncommon care that we have to put on, our involvement in the community and our use of resources. So yeah.
Well, really appreciated the tour of the whole grounds and facility that we went on earlier. It's great to see. I mean, it's a very advanced operation, but specifically within that, can you touch on a couple of the different things that you've done related to energy, related to reuse of different materials? That you've done a lot, but maybe touch on some of the highlights.
Yeah. I would say, the first piece is probably just inherent in our expansion. And, as I mentioned to you guys, so when we first started, we had a 70-barrel brew house. It was American made. We were running hoses to our cold cellar. So it was very sort of simple, normal brewing procedure. It's like you're linking these things together. It's basically one step above home brewing. And so there was sort of a natural evolution in terms of our efficiency just by virtue of scaling up. We moved from buying American made equipment to buying German, sort of European equipment, and they just have a higher burden on efficiency there. In general, they obviously are, that's sort of the heartbeat of engineering of any sort in the world. So there was sort of a natural evolution there. I think I showed you off of our kettle, we have a sort of a vapor condenser that runs through or a steam condenser that runs through a heat exchange. So we heat water coming into our brew house. We cool down wort going out to our cellar. Somebody far smarter than me in our organization calculated it's the equivalent of about 65 households' annual natural gas use. Wow. Just in that piece of equipment. So that was one piece that we looked at. I'd say another one is that I'm particularly excited about is our yeast beer recovery system. So I showed you our centrifuge that we have right off of our cold block. Very small but mighty piece of equipment that takes basically our sediment from our fermentation, runs it through a centrifuge, very simply, takes all of the liquid that is contained in that sediment from fermentation and sends, which is beer, puts that beer back into into our cellar, and then takes spent grain and sends it off to cattle to be used for food. And another calculation there for you is that we effectively are able to capture about 10,000 barrels worth of beer every year, which is probably equivalent to the average size of an American brewery in the U.S. So, wow. Yeah, it's
that's formerly waste.
Yeah, which was formerly waste, it made it more difficult to transport that waste out. So you've got trucking expenses, fuel expenses, and then it was suboptimal for farmers to use in their feed mix. So it accomplishes a number of different things. And anytime, maybe the cattle are a little less excited about having feed that has like a lot of beer in it, but it's better to go back in the tanks.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The two others that stood out for me when we were high up looking over the 60 acres that you guys have is I believe you said 13 megawatt solar array. Yep. And then you've got your own water recapture system and recapturing the methane coming off that. Maybe you can share a bit more there.
Yeah. So on the solar array, for anybody that's spent time in Paso Robles, California, or in the Central Coast, that it gets very hot and it's sunny most of the year. So solar is an easy, and on the flip side, beer is a very energy intensive process. So solar makes perfect sense for us. You just need a lot of space. We were fortunate to buy a number of years back a parcel on the other side of the track. So it's not perfectly situated for freight coming back and forth for traffic. So you need some sort of passive systems that don't require a lot of traffic and visitation. So solar makes perfect sense for that. So we've got a 5-acre solar array, 13.5 megawatts, takes care of about 60% of our annual output. And we're in the process of increasing that. We've got another few acres going. We're throwing some more panels up on our cold warehouse, up on the roof with a ballast mounted system. And solar has been a really good project for us. And we'll be by the end of this year at about 100%. So probably 110%. Just you never know how things go. But that's the solar. And then you asked about wastewater.
Yeah.
So for every can of beer, you have to use about 4 cans of water to make that beer. And water, as we mentioned, is a very difficult resource to come by in California. We want to use that as sort of efficiently as possible, get the most out of it that we can. And we have to treat our effluent, which is all of the the wastewater that rinses out our tanks, It has sediment, it has yeast, it's sort of sludgy wastewater, if you will. That all gets pumped over to our wastewater treatment facility, which is also on the other side of the tracks. And we have two systems. We've got an anaerobic system and an aerobic, sort of three different aerobic ponds. It starts off in the anaerobic system. We've got a big tank. It's basically a big gut. So you got to make sure it is at the right temperature. You put all the wastewater in there. If it's at the right temperature, the bacteria that's present inside of there will start to digest all of the solids and release methane gas as a byproduct. We have these ridges that allow us to capture that methane gas, run it back through a sort of a stack, burn it off. We've got a turbine on that stack so that we do some net metering, as well as there's a heat exchanger that we actually use to keep that digester at the right temperature. So that's, it's one of those examples of it's why we have an engineering team that knows a lot about this stuff, because it just sort of makes sense. And then our wastewater ponds, we then send our runoff into those wastewater ponds where they're sort of further broken down, all of the materials inside of there, and then eventually we send it back to the city. But the ultimate hope, and you're going to help me out with this, is ground application. So send it back into the water table and keep the cycle going. Pick it back up and make it into beer. So yeah.
I noticed that in several different points when we were walking around, one thing that really impressed me was your real focus on efficiency all the way through the process, and trying to maximize efficiency at every stage. And there's so many different ways to do that. You guys have spent a lot of time. Have you kind of twisting it a little bit? Have you contemplated adding batteries to your energy system? Have you discussed, some of the advantages of reducing your overall consumption by storing some of that here, and then that takes away from your consumption in the evening, or purchasing from the grid for the remaining balance?
Yeah, we've definitely had discussions around battery, around storage. Every year we have, right around this time of year, we've got a sort of an engineering finance heads put their heads together.
Budgeting time.
It's budgeting time, and the capital improvements are what they discuss. And we talked about before sort of the profitability piece, and any capital improvement, you have a discussion around payback and around ROI and things like that. And so we are basically just going down the list of what's a 10-year long-term improvement plan based on what the highest return projects are for our business. So yeast beer recovery, that was like top of the list because that's got a huge payback.
Sure.
Our other one that we talked about is CO2 recovery. So capturing CO2 off the top of the tanks. That's another big one. But these projects are all extremely sort of time intensive and capital intensive as well. So I'd say, yeah, things like that are definitely on the list, but they get knocked down a little bit.
We still have to remain profitable in order to keep building these efficiencies. Yeah.
For us, sustainability is not just the slogan. It's also running a sustainable long-term business that's healthy financially. It's healthy for the environment. It's healthy for our people. And so finding the right intersection of those three is
I think that's one of the coolest quotes I heard today. People, profit, and planet. And that's making that intersection, and that's your commitment. That's because you can't do any of this without profit. And so people think, well, let's just do it for the betterment. But as a company, we still have to run the company in order, and the intersection with people as well. It's a really cool concept.
It's a three-legged stool that you got to have, and anybody that's out there just spreading the message that they're just for the planet or their people and not the profitability piece. You're like, well, you're actually marketing this concept to sell your product. So there's a profitability element to that too. But
how do you see that three-legged stool of people, planet, profit coming into your strategic decision-making, coming into the boardroom for some of these?
Yeah. I mean, it's capital improvement. Breweries are difficult. I mean, if we ran a software company, it's not a very capital intensive business, and it's an extremely high margin business where you're probably focusing all of your efforts on having people, quality of life, high salary, high wages, and that's your product at the end of the day is the people. For us brewing, it's, we've got a factory, lot of capital improvements required. As you scale, it becomes really difficult to sort of maintain capacities at the right level. If you go build a new brew house to increase your capacity, now you've broken all the other downstream components that can't handle that, increased throughput. So, there are a lot of discussions. As a brewer, any manufacturing plant, you have to have a 5-year, 10-year plan, because you cannot just be looking down next year. All right, this is what we're going to build. This is what we're going to do. Every year, it's millions of dollars worth of capital improvements, worth of big projects. And, every once in a while, you got to take a big chunk on something, and you've got to know where you're going. So it's a huge piece of our sort of board level discussions, of our executive discussions. It's why we have an engineering department. Those guys can take you through what our 10-year, take over the world looks like.
Well, to the extent that you can share within that, what are some of the things that you're most excited about over the next 5, 10 plus years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got beer is going through a little bit of a tough patch right now. So total beer in the US was actually down 3% last year. Normally it's sort of operates within plus or minus a few points. So there's some weird things going on. So we're definitely cautious. Some uncertainty in the broader economy and the environment that we're in right now. So we're definitely being cautious. But the biggest thing we got coming down the pipe is our CO2 recovery project. And as I told you guys, there's a really cool thing in beer where the amount of CO2 that's required to operate your packaging lines is almost perfectly equal to the amount of beer that you create through natural fermentation. And right now, most breweries, and ourselves included, we purchase CO2 and release CO2 from our fermentation. So there's an easy way to kind of close that gap, which is our CO2 recovery system that's going to be coming in by the end of the year.
Yeah.
No,
that's a big piece. And I was super excited to hear that you guys are doing that. Yeah. What, as you guys have gone on this journey and you've deployed solar and you've got anaerobic digestion, you've brought a lot of efficiencies in, what are some of the challenges that you faced in that process of deploying these different systems?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, I think when you have a new system, there's always probably a year to 2 years worth of tweaking things in. As an example, we built our wastewater treatment pond, across that you guys saw. And those were probably a 2-year build and design. We built them. They were running perfectly fine, processing all of our wastewater. And then we had a rapid weather change. I think it started raining for a period and then it got really, really hot. And effectively the bacteria weren't breaking them down. And as a result, there was a stench over the entire, near all of our neighbors in the city of Paso Robles for like weeks. And we were getting calls from the neighbors. It was like written up in the newspaper. It was a huge PR nightmare. And that was just a result of this is a new system. It hadn't sort of fully gotten going yet in that natural process. So we were trucking effluent out. We were, we had diffusers that we brought in that were releasing additional oxygen to try to get this thing jump started. It was a huge nightmare for us. So that's just one example of kind of what can go wrong as you unveil these big projects. So yeah.
Along those lines, when you're talking about sustainability within your organization and incorporating the marketing piece, you guys do a lot of things here that I don't think a lot of people know about. And it's becoming more and more, especially in down markets, which the alcohol industry is in. There was a report just released by Rabobank that was talking about, these are some of the major mistakes that the alcohol industry does during down periods. And number 3 was lessening their, attention and promotion and building in of sustainability.
Yeah.
So, my question to you is how does your marketing department, not overblow it, but, how does that work into the overall scheme of who you are and how does the public get to know that fact?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it actually sparked one quick thing I'll just mention because you were asking about how we think about projects and how we rack and stack them. And I think last year we had internal discussion around we're making the concerted effort to switch between capacity driven projects to efficiency driven projects. So our lens for approving these things sort of switched and how we thought about them. It's like, we're going to get really efficient while we can. Input costs are going up. All this stuff is happening. So let's focus on efficiency. And that's a different sort of ROI, go, no go calculation that you have to do. On the marketing side, I'd say, I think we've always had we don't do a very good job. And I think we have a personality issue talking about anything except for the beer. Our slogan is beer before glory. Quality is a big piece of everything that we do. You probably saw beer before glory is actually emblazoned over our brew house in a huge steel letters. And one of our other things that we always say internally is we're in search of the perfect beer. Like that's what we're here to do. We're not here to save the planet. We're not. And I'm a tree hugger, so I love the planet, but we're just simple people. We're trying to make the best beer that we possibly can. But I do think we've just struggled with that. And I think we do have a story to tell. There is an efficiency story. It's becoming increasingly important to consumers. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that, but make sure it sort of stays true to who we are. We don't become sort of over puff it and make it forget about the beer while we talk about saving the planet. And there are other companies that do that, and it's like, all power to them. But it's just not who we are in our identity.
So no matter how sustainable you are, if the beer's not good,
it's like, what are you doing? Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting concept along the same lines is, the next level of consumer, the next generation, if you will, they're not going to give up on either. Yeah. Right. You have to be equal on both. Yeah. And I think there's not enough people in the alcohol industry that are doing like you're doing that are not for the glory. Yeah. Efficiency first, and then in enabling all these sustainable efforts that are big capex. Yeah. But there's a reason for it, and it makes financial sense. But sharing that story is a big part of what consumers now are marrying with their consumer choice. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how, this will evolve, especially in the alcohol industry, and, getting that marketing message out that it's not just marketing. Come and look, come and visit, come and see.
Yeah, come check it out.
It's an amazing view, seeing all the solar and all of the, various things that you've done so far.
Yeah.
So, every guest that we have on, we like to ask a couple questions of.
Right. I'll do my best.
So I'll start with what's your favorite quote?
Yeah, I was reviewing that before, and I think what I would say is it's a favorite quote from my dad, and it's maybe a Marine Corps quote. I don't know, but there's three types of people. There's what is it? Those who wonder, those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those that wonder what happened. So I think that's the big one. But yeah. And
I'm sure in your family, it's a lot about making it happen.
Yeah, you got to make it happen. Can't sit by and watch something go by. And in beer, it's super relevant because it's I always joke like we should have started a mayonnaise company or like a tissue company or something, because that product hasn't changed. Whereas beer, there's this sort of ridiculous expectation of, you're always churning. What's the next thing? What's the next innovation? And it's tough to keep up with. So yeah.
As one of the things we always like to ask is if you could be any energy technology, what would it be and why?
Yeah. You guys saw my spiel earlier that sometimes the simplest technology is the best. And the first thing that came to the top of my mind is my neighbor has a pool. And, heating a pool is like a ridiculous luxury to have sort of traditionally. And he installed this sort of solar heater, and it doesn't take cobalt or anything like that. It's literally, he has a pump that already runs the pool. He added onto the pump basically a coil, black PVC that sits out in black stripping that sits out in the open sun, heats the coils, and then pumps back into a pool, and that's it. It's like his pool is 75 degrees perfectly every day. It's the simplest technology you could possibly imagine. And I think that's my favorite thing that came to the top of my mind.
I like that. Yeah. Solar thermal.
Solar thermal. Yeah. Just easy, no crazy chemicals or anything. Or metals.
That's great. That's great. So in closing, I think two questions for you. One, do you have any, like, beer is a growing business. We've seen craft brews explode, craft breweries, and the number of brands exploding. But do you have any advice for anybody that has an interest in getting into this industry, or anybody that wants to get in maybe alcohol more broadly?
Yeah. Anybody thinking about getting into the industry, I would just say think twice. It's
mayonnaise.
Tissues and mayonnaise. It's a very difficult business. And I think it's sometimes akin to sort of restaurants where it's like, I think people have an inclination to jump into that industry because it's, everybody eats food. And so everybody has an opinion on food. And, there is some sort of the glory of being in the industry, which is sharing a beer, sharing a plate or a meal with somebody, is really rewarding, but it is very, very difficult business to succeed in. When we first started, there were about 350, 400 breweries in the U.S. and there's 9,500 breweries today.
Wow.
So it's a mature industry. It's saturated. It's very capital intensive. It's very resource dependent. I mean, all of the things that you would sort of would be flags, barriers to entry exist. But with that, I would say it's awesome. I love it.
Yes. If you could have us have anybody on the podcast, who would it be?
Yeah.
Why? And what would you ask them?
Yeah, I don't know who this person is, but I was thinking like who I would want to listen to. And I think there's a lot of similarities, but it's sort of dairy farmers. European dairy is an extremely advanced sort of, they're probably ahead of the game in many ways than brewers, or at least a lot of the technology is equivalent. So somebody from that perspective, I think I would be interested to listen in on. Really anybody from any of the European countries that runs a beverage manufacturing, because they have to deal with a lot bigger regulatory environment, things like that put them far ahead. I mean, as you know, U.S. wine technology is really driven in many ways by what's happening in Australia, because they've got labor shortages and they have to be automated. They have to do things like that. So anything about automation, with regards to beverage, I would definitely tune in for.
Okay, so digging in on the automation efficiency side of things.
Yeah, I think there's still a long way to go in terms of automation. And how that impacts quality, stuff that we're looking at, making sure that we can use our resources in a way through automation that keeps the beer high quality.
Great.
There's a bunch of those things.
Great.
In the back of my mind.
Well, in wrapping up, as someone who loves your beer, for our listeners that maybe have not yet tried it or want to learn more about the brewery, the journey, the energy, things that you've done, where can they learn more about the brewery? Where can they find where your beers are sold?
Yeah. Paso Robles, California. That's where our brewery is. So if you're ever stopping by, driving through, we're right off the 101. Come poke your head in. We've got a tap room, freshest beer in the world, because it's made about 50 feet away. So that, or I think firestonebeer.com. We're on all the socials and doing all the things. But that's Come check us out. Freshest beer you'll find.
That's right. Well, Nick, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you for the tour. Excited for what you guys are doing and what you have ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'll be tuning in.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Patrick.
Excellent.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.